investigative journalism research in post-Soviet countries. Can you tell me, please, what's so different about these post-Soviet countries and its investigative journalism that you decided to research?
Well, since 1991, there's been obviously a lot of freedom granted to independent countries. And it's interesting to me how that the media has developed very differently in each former post-Soviet country. And I'm interested in specifically how the lessons of Ukraine or the lessons of, say, Moldova or other countries, or Georgia, where there seems to be a little more freedom, how these can be adopted in some other states. I'm also interested in the Balkans and why they developed in the way they did, as opposed to some of the other states. And I'm interested in sort of the juxtaposition between all of these countries. It's very interesting to me because I was just in Belarus this week, and the journalists there look at Ukraine as this amazing country where so many documents are open. And they started asking me about the U.S., and I started telling them about things like the First Amendment and freedom of information, which they had never heard of. So they think we have it really easy in the U.S., that we could just go to the courthouse and get documents, which isn't exactly true. So I think it's really interesting how each country views their colleagues in other countries, and how they're all kind of comparing and trying to learn from each other on how to improve media in each country.
So you've already been to Belarus and Ukraine, and you talked here with one of the best investigative journalists like Mitrov, Anna Babinets or Denis Bigus. So what have they shared with you? Like, what are their main concerns here?
They report on corruption and repeatedly report on corruption, draw a line in the, a map, here's the documents, here are how these people are connected, and yet nothing happens. And I have to say, if that happened to me in the United States when I was working on stories, I would be incredibly frustrated. The other thing is that it's dangerous, and they have to watch if they're being followed. They're frustrated with the Pavel Sheremet investigation. I think that I don't think that they liked how SBU manipulated the Babchenko situation. So I think that they constantly feel like they're under the gun, and yet no one's paying attention or responding to the corruption that they're pointing out.
So how does it happen in the US? What's the difference?
Well, I would like to say that in most cases something happens when you do point it out. Once you do an investigation, usually, and this is a general statement, but usually prosecutors will jump on a case. Politicians will be sure to come out and say, we're going to pass laws against this. This is terrible, because they want to use that opportunity to advance their own careers, right? So usually you have politicians trying to help you, and sometimes even calling you in the process of an investigation, so they'll be ready to present some sort of bill or some sort of legislation in response to whatever you find. And in some cases, that when the government doesn't respond, then you make it another story, and you call up the prosecutor or people in Congress, and you say, why aren't you interested in this? And why are you not going to go after these people? And so then you kind of put pressure on them. So they know that, and so they do try to respond.
So in terms of, let's say, political corruption, if the investigation discovered some huge case of a politician who's been corrupt or who abused his power somehow, what's the reaction of like a normal society in this situation?
For example, the Me Too situation with Harvey Weinstein. A year ago, if you had said in a newsroom or as an actress that you had been sexually harassed, that was career suicide. No one would have done that. And because of Me Too, and because these women, largely women investigative reporters, went after these Harvey Weinstein and other actors and writers and producers and TV personalities, the reaction from the public is, yeah, they need to go. And even before there's any, trial, prosecution, civil courts, they're just they're being laid off. They're being fired. I think in the U.S. what's effective is that when elections happen, members of Congress will point out that some corruption came to light and this person did nothing. And so I think that needs to happen here, is that Parliament needs to hold each other accountable. They need to hold the prosecutors accountable. There needs to be some outside forces, and the public needs to put pressure on these people in power so that they actually do their jobs.
In terms of freedom of press and access to the information, what do you think Ukraine is today?
I think Ukraine is getting better, and I think it's improving. The e-declarations are amazing. It's a really great font of information. I think the tender system is very good and in some ways better than the U.S. I think police needs to be opened up, and I think the courts need to be opened up so that we know who the perpetrators are and who the victims are. And I think, in my opinion, that investigative reporting needs to get more out in this country on the local level. There's so much having been done about Poroshenko and about Poroshenko colleagues that I think, in my opinion, a lot of readers and viewers have become numb to it. They expect it. And the other thing is that a lot of the investigative reporting doesn't show you what happens as a result of this corruption. So all these millions or billions of dollars that are stolen, well, they're stolen from the people of Ukraine. So that money is not going for education. That money is not going to hospitals. That money is not going to healthcare or medicine. And I think there needs to be a much bigger push to show who the true victims are of this corruption. If you talk to regular, ordinary Ukrainians, they'll tell you the number one problem in their lives are crooked cops. So why not open those records or push, particularly through the anti-corruption campaigns, to push police records to be open, at least the rest, so we can find out who is being arrested and for why.
Ukrainian journalists learned how to get around with the closed documents. Like, does it work like this in the US, or how is it different?
Sure. In the U.S., there are lots of times where reporters are denied documents that should be open. They're denied the records under the basis of national security. The other big issue that's happening is that politicians are using their private emails to get around not revealing what's going on, because they're not putting it in their public emails, which are open and FOIAble, as we call it. They fall under the Freedom of Information Act. Instead, they're putting it into the private emails so they can say, oh, it's private, and they're doing a government business in their private emails. And unfortunately, it takes a long time and a long court process in order to get through, years in order to get access to that information.
So, to your opinion, what is the biggest challenge for Ukrainian investigative journalism today?
I think number one is to not feel defeated. You can feel defeated because it takes a long time to see a country change, but I think we are seeing it change. It's slow. I think number two is lack of documents, lack of openness by legislators. And I think number three is just a disinterest from the public. I think there's been so many years of corruption stories that I think the citizens have become almost immune to it, or feeling apathetic, as though there's nothing, they have no power. And so I think investigative journalists have to re-inspire the residents, the citizens of Ukraine, that they can do something, that it's not futile.
Ukrainian investigative journalists, at most, are always facing this situation when, after discovering something within the government or within our politician or like our security service, for instance, we face a lot of critique from the officials, because being in the state of war with Russia, we're being said that we serve Russia's interests in this. We shouldn't discourage such things like that and report them to people. How did journalists have to react to such mistakes?
I think they have to tell the truth. I mean, that's the number one rule of being a journalist, right? Maybe also number one too is question authority. So in this country, the government is authority, and your job as the journalist is to question the authority and tell the truth. Now, there are certain cases when you probably shouldn't reveal certain things. If it's an issue of national security, if it's going to affect war patterns, or how they're going to execute some sort of strategy, of course, you wouldn't reveal those sorts of things. But any criticism of the government just makes the government better. It's not tearing down the government. It's trying to build a more open society and a more open government, and all that is great.